He knew things no stranger should know. Welcome to Sherlock File. I am your host, Julian Whitmore. Share your location in the comments. I cherish every reply. Happy you're here. Into the mystery. Holmes's voice was calm, yet the intensity behind it was palpable. He held the letter with great care, as though it might shatter if he handled it too roughly. Lestrade, standing at a distance, shifted uneasily, clearly unsure of what to make of the moment. The detective's fingers traced the edges of the parchment, his eyes scanning the words as though they held the very key to a riddle that only he could decipher. "What does it say?" Lestrade asked, the question hanging in the air like an unspoken demand. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the letter over in his hands, inspecting the seal. It was an unusual mark, a one I had never seen before, a crest that appeared to be partially worn away, its details faint but deliberate. "This is interesting," Holmes murmured. He gestured for Lestrade to step closer and took the letter from his own hands. Carefully, he began to read aloud, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet intensity. "To the Honourable Edward Greenway, I trust this finds you well. Our business remains on track as previously discussed. I trust you have taken the necessary precautions to secure our mutual interests. The meeting will take place as scheduled, and no further delay will be tolerated. Your role in this matter remains crucial, and your discretion is paramount. Please arrive alone. Failure to comply with our agreement will result in severe consequences. Your privacy, as always, is protected." Lestrade's face tightened as he listened, but he didn't speak. Holmes paused, glancing at the inspector. "Do you see, Lestrade? The letter speaks of an agreement, one that appears to involve a matter of great secrecy. Greenway was involved in something far more dangerous than we first imagined. This was no ordinary man." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "But who would want to kill a man who had so many secrets, and why would they leave him in a locked room?" Holmes placed the letter back in his pocket and stood silently for a moment. His eyes darted back and forth across the room, scanning for something, anything, that might give him a further clue. There was something in the air, something elusive yet unmistakable, that suggested the answers were closer than we realized. "The manner of his death is quite curious," Holmes continued, his tone now more analytical. "No signs of struggle, no blood beyond the immediate wound, and no disturbance of the furniture. It's as though the killer or killers had free access to the room and were certain they wouldn't be interrupted." He gave a quick glance toward the window, which was locked tight. And yet, the door was locked from the inside. It was meant to be a perfect crime. I stood in silence, watching my friend as he paced back and forth. His mind was already working, piecing together the strands of the case like a complex puzzle. Holmes had a way of making the seemingly impossible seem solvable, and I had little doubt that the truth lay just beneath the surface. Lestrade's voice cut through my reverie. "You believe the man knew his killer, then?" Holmes nodded. "Aye, but there was no certainty in his gesture." "Yes, I do. However, the circumstances are far from simple. Whoever did this must have had access to Greenway's most private affairs, perhaps even before his arrival in London. There's one thing we know for sure. Whoever killed Greenway was no stranger to him. The letter he held, the warning contained within it, suggests something personal, something far beyond a mere robbery or crime of passion." I could see Lestrade trying to piece together the riddle in his own mind, but it was clear he was struggling to grasp Holmes's logic. "What do you propose we do next?" he asked, his tone resigned but eager for direction. Holmes's lips curved ever so slightly. "We begin by examining Greenway's relationships, his associations, his dealings. Anyone he may have come into contact with who might have a reason to see him dead. He walked to the desk, flipping open the drawer. A man who collects secrets, as Greenway clearly did, may very well have made enemies. Let us see if any of those enemies have left behind a trace. Lestrade nodded and stepped aside to allow Holmes to continue. I, too, moved to the other side of the room, watching as Holmes methodically rifled through the desk's contents. He was like a man on a mission, his fingers dancing over papers and letters as though he were deciphering a code. After a few minutes, Holmes pulled a small stack of papers from a hidden compartment in the drawer. He flipped through them with practiced ease, scanning the contents with quick, deliberate movements. "There," he said, pausing on a particular sheet of paper. He handed it to me. And I read the brief note aloud. "Meet me at midnight. Bring the documents. If you fail to comply, I will expose everything. Your life is in my hands." The handwriting was elegant, with a slightly slanted flourish, but it was the message itself that struck me as odd. It wasn't a mere threat, but a promise. Whoever wrote this had power over Greenway, something so compelling that it drove him to take drastic measures. "Do you see, Watson?" Holmes said, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "This is no ordinary blackmail scheme. It's something far more dangerous. And I have a feeling that the documents Greenway was carrying with him that night may hold the key to understanding why he had to die." I watched him carefully, a sense of awe rising in me as he pieced together the truth with ease. Holmes was already forming his plan of action, and I could sense the excitement building in him. The investigation was no longer a matter of curiosity. It had become a race against time to uncover a much deeper, darker conspiracy. Holmes turned to Lestrade with a focused expression. "We need to find these documents. They are the key to everything." Lestrade hesitated for a moment before nodding. "And where do we start?" Holmes smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching in anticipation. "We begin with Greenway's associates. But first, I think it's time we take a closer look at the house itself. There's still much we don't know." Holmes moved swiftly toward the door, his steps measured and purposeful. I followed closely behind, the weight of the investigation pressing down upon me with each step. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with mystery, as though it too was waiting for the secrets to be uncovered. Lestrade trailed behind us, his expression still one of confusion mixed with growing admiration for Holmes's unyielding confidence. We passed through the hall and into the parlour, where Holmes immediately began to examine the surroundings with his characteristic thoroughness. I observed him, my mind racing with the new details he had uncovered. The threatening note, the strange letter in Greenway's hand, the peculiar connection between the dead man and someone powerful enough to control his actions. It was becoming evident that this was no ordinary murder. Holmes approached a small side table near the fireplace, running his fingers over the wood with meticulous care. His eyes darted to every corner of the room, and as though searching for something hidden in plain sight. "Lestrade, you said that no one had access to this room after the discovery of the body?" "That's correct," Lestrade replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "We've locked the house down. No one has come or gone." Holmes's gaze shifted toward the window, where the curtains were drawn tightly, leaving the room in near darkness. He stepped closer and, with a deft movement, drew the curtains back, allowing the faint light from the gas lamps outside to spill in. There, across the room, on the far wall, a small picture frame caught my eye. Holmes's gaze lingered there for a moment before he crossed the room with a purposeful stride. "Watson, do you see it?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. I moved closer, my eyes scanning the wall. A small painting, an indistinct scene of the countryside, hung crookedly, as though hastily placed. Holmes reached up and straightened it. Behind the frame, an unusual indentation marred the surface of the wall. "The wall is hollow," he muttered to himself, more to confirm his own deduction than to inform us. "This is where we'll find our answers." With a sharp motion, he pulled at the frame, revealing a concealed latch. The wall behind it swung open with a quiet creak, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside there were several manila folders, old and worn. They were stacked in an orderly fashion, as though they had been carefully placed there not long ago. Holmes's fingers danced over them with a strange sense of reverence before he began pulling them out one by one. Lestrade stepped forward, his breath quickening. "What is it, Holmes?" "Well, what's in there?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flipped open the first folder and began scanning the contents with the precision only he could manage. Each page seemed more incriminating than the last, filled with correspondence, financial records, and most strikingly, photographs of individuals whose faces were familiar to me, members of the upper echelons of London society. "These are the documents Greenway was carrying," Holmes said, his voice low and steady. "They were hidden here, but not by Greenway himself. No, this was the work of someone who knew precisely where to look." I glanced at Lestrade, who was standing motionless, his brow furrowed in confusion. But why would he keep these here? And why not destroy them? Holmes didn't respond immediately. He was still scanning the papers with a quiet intensity, all his mind clearly working in overdrive. Finally he glanced up, his sharp eyes catching mine. "Greenway didn't choose to keep these documents. They were entrusted to him. Whoever had control over them had control over Greenway." The weight of his words hung in the air. It was becoming clearer now. Greenway wasn't just some hapless victim caught in the crossfire of a criminal conspiracy. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, one that involved some of the most influential figures in the city. Holmes quickly shuffled through the files, stopping only when he found one that seemed to spark his interest. The document inside was a contract of sorts, but the names listed were nothing short of extraordinary. Several prominent businessmen, politicians, and even a few aristocrats were mentioned. Lestrade stepped forward, his eyes wide with shock. Are these people involved in illegal activities?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He sat back on the edge of the desk, his mind racing as he pieced together the puzzle. "Not just illegal activities, Lestrade. This goes deeper than we thought. These individuals, they're all connected by a web of secrecy, one that Greenway had the misfortune of stumbling upon. It seems he was becoming far too knowledgeable for their comfort." "So they killed him to silence him," I said, my voice filled with grim understanding. Holmes nodded slowly, but there was something else, something even more disquieting. But not just to silence him. No, they needed to make sure that no one else could piece this together. The murder was staged in such a way as to point to a locked room mystery, ensuring that anyone investigating would be stumped. They wanted to buy time for their plans to continue without interference. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The conspiracy was far more elaborate than I had imagined, and yet Holmes's expression revealed no fear, no hesitation. This was the kind of challenge that invigorated him, the kind of case that pushed his mind to its limits. "We must move quickly," Holmes continued, his voice steady and authoritative. "Lestrade, I need you to gather all the names on this list. I suspect one of them knows more than they're letting on. We'll need to speak to each of them, but with great care. We don't want to alert them to our intentions just yet." Lestrade, though overwhelmed, nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mr. Holmes. What do you think we should do next?" Holmes stood up, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the door. "Next, We visit the last place where Greenway was seen alive. It's time we spoke to the people who knew him best. We must understand what he knew before it's too late. As we stepped out of the study, the weight of the case seemed to press even harder upon me. The pieces were falling into place, but with each new discovery, the stakes grew higher. This was no longer a simple murder investigation. It was a race against time to unravel a dangerous conspiracy and to stop it before it was too late. Holmes moved with a brisk, purposeful air as we exited the townhouse, his mind already working through the next stages of the investigation. The weight of the case hung in the air, thickening the atmosphere around us as we made our way down the fog-laden street. Lestrade, who had followed us out, seemed more confused than ever, as I was still struggling to piece together the full scope of the events. "We need to visit Greenway's last known associate," Holmes said without looking back, his voice cutting through the fog like a razor. "His connections are the key to understanding his death." Lestrade quickened his pace to match Holmes's stride, his brow furrowed. "Who do you mean, Holmes? Do you have a suspect in mind?" Holmes glanced sideways at the inspector, his lips curled in that familiar, enigmatic half-smile. "Not a suspect, Lestrade, rather an informant. Greenway wasn't acting alone. He had someone guiding him, someone pulling strings. I believe this individual can shed light on why Greenway was murdered and who was behind it." The path to this informant led us to a small, unassuming house on the edge of London, tucked between a row of worn, weathered shops. The sign outside read, "Dr. Philip Carrington, private consultant," and though the building itself was modest, there was something about it that gave off an air of quiet importance. Holmes paused before the door, his sharp gaze scanning the street for any sign of movement before he turned to face Lestrade and me. "Stay close, Lestrade," Holmes instructed. "Carrington is not to be underestimated. He is deeply involved in this matter, though whether he is an ally or an obstacle remains to be seen." We entered the house, and as soon as the door closed behind us, the air felt heavier. Dr. Carrington, a man in his late 50s, with silvering hair and a pair of pince-nez glasses perched on his nose, greeted us with a wary look. He was sitting behind a desk, cluttered with various papers, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Mr. Holmes, Doctor? Watson and Inspector Lestrade, I presume," he said, his voice smooth but laced with suspicion. "I was wondering when you would arrive. Please, take a seat." Holmes, ever the figure of calm composure, took a seat immediately. I followed suit, and Lestrade, though hesitant, joined us. Dr. Carrington didn't offer us tea or refreshments. His attention focused entirely on Holmes. The tension in the room was palpable. "I trust you know why we are here, Dr. Carrington," Holmes said, his tone cutting through the silence like a blade. "We're investigating the death of Edward Greenway." Carrington's face hardened slightly at the mention of the name, but he maintained his composure. "I know why you're here, Mr. Holmes, but you must understand I have very little to offer in terms of answers. Greenway was a complicated man. We were involved in certain business matters, but beyond that I can't speak to his personal affairs." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Business matters? What kind of matters?" Carrington paused, clearly measuring his words. He glanced toward the window, as if considering whether or not to speak further. "Greenway came to me some months ago, seeking advice on an investment opportunity. It was something he believed would change his life, but—" He hesitated again, then added, "I had no idea it would lead to this." Holmes's eyes flashed with interest. "And what sort of investment was it?" Carrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I cannot speak on the specifics, but I can tell you that it involved several prominent figures in London, names you would be familiar with, I'm sure." Lestrade's eyes widened at the mention of prominent figures, but Holmes remained eerily calm. "Names such as?" he pressed. Carrington's lips tightened. "I cannot say. They are powerful men, Mr. Holmes. To name them is to risk my own safety." Holmes didn't flinch. "I understand. But let me make one thing clear, Dr. Carrington. If you wish to remain safe, you will tell me everything you know. Edward Greenway's death is the product of a very dangerous conspiracy, and if you are not careful, you may soon find yourself caught in the web of deception that led to it." Carrington's gaze shifted from Holmes to me and back again. He let out a long breath, as if resigning himself to the inevitable. "Very well," he said, his voice now tinged with fear. "Just Greenway became involved with a group of men who were not what they appeared to be. They offered him a chance to secure power and wealth beyond his wildest dreams. But I warned him repeatedly that these men were not to be trusted." "Who are these men?" Holmes demanded. "What is their objective?" Carrington glanced over his shoulder as though ensuring no one else was within earshot. "They call themselves the Silent Circle," he whispered. "A secret society that operates behind the scenes, influencing the highest levels of government, business, and even criminal activity. Greenway was seduced by their promises, but I tried to steer him away. He didn't listen." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The Silent Circle? And Greenway was involved with them?" Carrington nodded gravely. "He was, but not by choice. I stumbled upon one of their operations by accident. I believe he thought he could use the information for leverage, but once you're in the circle, there's no escaping it." Holmes's eyes burned with intensity. "And Greenway's death? Was it an attempt to silence him?" Carrington swallowed hard. "Yes, he was going to expose them. He had gathered enough evidence, enough leverage to bring them down. That's why he was killed." Holmes leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "This changes everything," he muttered to himself. "Lestrade, I believe we now know exactly who we're dealing with. The Silent Circle has far-reaching influence, but no matter how powerful they may be, they will not escape justice." I felt a chill run through me as Holmes stood up, his face set with determination. "Dr. Carrington, I suggest you take every precaution. It seems you are now caught in their web as well. If they come for you, don't hesitate to contact me." Carrington nodded, though his face was pale with fear. "I will, Mr. Holmes, thank you." As we left the house and stepped back into the foggy London streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something much larger than we had initially imagined. The Silent Circle was no ordinary criminal enterprise. It was a force that had infiltrated the very fabric of society. And if Holmes's suspicions were correct, there was no telling how deep the conspiracy ran, or who would be the next victim. "We're getting closer, Watson," Holmes said, his voice as sharp as ever. "But we must tread carefully. The Silent Circle is watching us now." The fog had thickened as we made our way back to Baker Street, each step feeling heavier than the last. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent, his mind clearly working through the new revelations we had uncovered at Dr. Carrington's office. The Silent Circle. The name lingered in the air like a dark omen, a secret society that had woven itself into the very fabric of London's power structure. I glanced at Holmes, who was walking with an intensity that matched the weight of the case. His brow was furrowed, and his sharp eyes seemed to be looking at something far beyond the foggy streets ahead of us. We had learned more than we had expected, but we were still no closer to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. If anything, the more we uncovered, the more dangerous the investigation became. "Oh, Holmes," I began, my voice cutting through the silence. "How do you intend to approach this? The Silent Circle is a shadowy, elusive organization. Dr. Carrington's warnings were clear. Once you're in their sights, you're trapped. Holmes didn't answer immediately, but his lips curled into a slight smile. That's exactly why I don't intend to stay in their sights for long, Watson. We will have to move swiftly. If Greenway's death was meant to silence him, it's likely they're already aware that we are investigating, and if Carrington is correct, they'll have eyes on him as well. I frowned, struggling to comprehend the scale of the conspiracy. But if they're so powerful, how can we stop them? How can we even begin to uncover the full extent of their influence? Holmes's eyes gleamed with a spark of determination. By cutting through the fog of secrecy, Watson. If they've planted themselves in the highest levels of society, they will have left a trail. Our task now is to find that trail and follow it. One way or another, they will make a mistake. We reached Baker Street, and Holmes immediately made his way inside, shedding his coat as he went. I followed him into the sitting room, where he quickly began to sift through his collection of papers and notes, his mind moving a mile a minute. I settled into my usual armchair, watching as Holmes worked, the quiet tension in the room growing with every passing moment. After a few minutes, Holmes looked up, his face alight with that familiar gleam of insight. "Watson, I believe we've overlooked something important." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The letter on the one Greenway held in his hand at the time of his death. I believe it was more than just a warning. It was a message. But it wasn't meant for us. It was meant for someone inside the Silent Circle." I leaned forward, intrigued. "How do you figure that?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he reached for the letter, which he had carefully preserved in a drawer. He unfolded it with a delicate touch, reading the words again under the dim light of the room. "Notice the wording, Watson. The phrasing is deliberately vague. Our business remains on track. Your discretion is paramount. And the final line, failure to comply with our agreement will result in severe consequences." These are not the words of someone trying to intimidate a common enemy. They are words meant to reassure someone inside the group, to remind them of their loyalty. I thought for a moment. So, Greenway wasn't the target of the letter, he was simply the messenger. "Exactly," Holmes said, nodding. Greenway had become privy to something far more important than he realized. The Silent Circle had been using him as an intermediary, someone to deliver information without ever fully understanding the consequences. The letter was a final reminder of the control they held over him. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. So the murder wasn't just to silence him, it was to send a message to someone else, but who? Holmes gave me a knowing smile. "That, Watson, is the very question we must answer, and I believe I have a few ideas." Holmes moved to the window and peered out into the fog. He was silent for a moment, as though weighing his next move carefully, and then he turned back to face me, his expression resolute. "The Silent Circle isn't just hiding in the shadows. They've infiltrated every level of society, and their influence runs deep. But one thing about powerful men like them is that they always overestimate their ability to remain unseen. And when you push them, Watson, they reveal themselves." I leaned forward, eager to hear more. "What do you propose we do next?" "We need to take the fight directly to them," Holmes replied, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "It's time we find out who's pulling the strings. We'll start by speaking to those close to Greenway, people he trusted. They may have more information about this conspiracy than we realize." "But how do you know they won't be part of the circle themselves?" I asked, still grappling with the enormity of the task at hand. Holmes's lips curled into a small smile. "Because, Watson, everyone has a breaking point. The Silent Circle may be skilled at manipulating their pawns, But even the most loyal servant can be turned if you apply the right pressure. We simply need to find the right person. As Holmes paced the room, his thoughts were already racing ahead. He was a man driven by logic and instinct, and though the dangers of this case were becoming increasingly apparent, I could see the fire in his eyes. He was ready to face the very heart of the conspiracy. The key to understanding this mystery lies with those closest to Greenway, Holmes continued, and we will find them, Watson. We will expose the silent circle for what it is. As he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, but with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. The Silent Circle was no ordinary criminal organization. It was something far more dangerous, a shadow that threatened to engulf everything in its path. And now it was up to us to stop them. The following days were a blur of activity, each hour pressing us closer to the heart of the conspiracy. Holmes's energy seemed boundless, his mind consumed by the case, while I found myself equally immersed in the web of intrigue that was tightening around us. We had learned much, but there was still so much left to uncover. The Silent Circle was no longer a mere shadow, it was a looming presence, a danger that had seeped into the very foundations of London's elite. Holmes had a plan, of course, and he wasted no time in executing it. After carefully considering the most likely connections, we set about meeting those who had known Greenway, his colleagues, his friends, his contacts. Each person we encountered seemed to possess a small piece of the puzzle, but none of them seemed to know the full story. Each interaction, however, brought us closer to the truth, until one afternoon we received a visitor who would change the course of the investigation. It was just past noon when a soft knock echoed through the door of our Baker Street apartment. Holmes, who had been pacing near the fireplace, looked up, his eyes narrowing with an almost predatory focus. I rose from my chair as he made his way toward the door. "Come in," Holmes called, his voice carrying the authority of a man who already knew what was about to unfold. The door opened to reveal a tall, well-dressed man in his early 40s, his features sharp and angular, yet his expression was one of noticeable anxiety. His clothes, though expensive, were disheveled, as though he had rushed to the appointment without much thought for his appearance. His eyes flicked nervously around the room before settling on Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson?" the man said, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempts at composure. "My name is Alexander Morton. I don't know how to begin. I'm afraid I'm in some trouble, and I believe you may be the only ones who can help me." Holmes stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his attention keen. "Please, Mr. Morton, take a seat. You've come at an opportune moment." Morton hesitated before sitting down, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I knew Edward Greenway," he began, his voice faltering. "We met through business about a year ago." He was a good man, I thought. But now, with everything that's happened... He trailed off, clearly struggling to find the right words. Holmes didn't interrupt, his gaze never leaving the man as he waited for him to continue. I could see the wheels turning in Holmes's mind, his usual patience allowing Morton the time he needed to speak. "Mr. Morton, you've come to us for a reason. Please tell us what you know about Edward Greenway's death," Holmes urged, his voice calm but commanding. Morton took a deep breath before speaking again. "Greenway was involved with something dangerous, something I didn't fully understand at first. But when he started acting erratically, I knew something was wrong. He came to me a few days before his death asking for help. He said he had uncovered something that could bring down the Silent Circle. And he said they were involved in everything, from business dealings to politics, even crimes that I can't even begin to fathom." I felt my pulse quicken as Morton's words echoed in the room. The silent circle again. The very name sent a chill through me, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of London's polished exterior. "Did he say what exactly he had uncovered?" Holmes asked, his tone still measured, but filled with underlying urgency. Morton nodded, his face pale. He didn't go into details, he was too frightened. But he said they were watching him, and that if he didn't comply, they would kill him. He had the evidence, though, evidence that could expose them all. He paused, swallowing hard. He begged me to help him get it to the right people, but before I could act, he was dead. I exchanged a glance with Holmes, both of us now fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Morton had just confirmed what we had suspected all along. Greenway's death wasn't just a random act, it was a calculated move to silence him, and anyone who might be able to expose the silent circle. "What did you do after Greenway's death?" Holmes asked, his voice now laced with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Morton shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands wringing together. I did nothing at first. I was terrified. I didn't want to be next. But after some time I began to realize that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let them win. He looked directly at Holmes, his expression pleading. "I've come to you because I believe you're the only ones who can stop them. But I have the evidence Greenway wanted to send to the authorities, but I'm afraid I don't know what to do with it. If I give it to the wrong person, it could all be for nothing. I need your help, Mr. Holmes." Holmes regarded Morton carefully, his eyes narrowing as he processed the new information. I could see that he was already thinking several steps ahead, weighing the risks and potential outcomes. "Do you have the evidence with you?" Holmes asked, his voice low but intense. Morton hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I have it here." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound folder, placing it carefully on the table between us. "It's all there. The names, the documents, everything." Holmes didn't touch the folder immediately, instead, allowing his gaze to linger on it for a moment longer than necessary. "And you're certain this information is legitimate? That it will expose the silent circle?" Morton nodded vigorously. "Yes, I'm certain. Greenway was meticulous. He made sure I understood what was at stake." Holmes finally took the folder, his fingers brushing lightly against Morton's as he did so. He opened it slowly, scanning the contents with his usual precision. A few minutes passed in silence, the tension in the room palpable as Holmes studied the papers carefully. Finally he looked up, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of satisfaction and resolve. "Very well, Mr. Morton. We will take this to the authorities, but not in the manner you might expect. If we do this the right way, we will ensure that the silent circle is brought down from within. But first, we must make sure that this evidence is not destroyed or compromised." Lestrade's involvement would now be crucial, Holmes knew, but only if we could be certain of his loyalty. The stakes had never been higher. As Holmes folded the folder carefully, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing upon us. This was no longer just a murder investigation. This was a battle against a conspiracy that could shake the very foundations of society itself. "We move quickly from here, Watson," Holmes said, his voice now brimming with authority. "It's time we brought the silent circle out of the shadows." Holmes wasted no time. Once we had carefully secured the evidence in a hidden compartment, we began making arrangements to meet with Lestrade. The plan was clear in Holmes's mind. We would need to act swiftly and decisively. The silent circle was dangerous, its reach far beyond what we had initially suspected. But now we had a weapon, proof that could bring them to their knees if only we could expose it in the right way. The room seemed heavier now, the air thick with the weight of the decision we were about to make. Every step forward could be our last. If the Silent Circle discovered what we were up to, there would be no escaping their vengeance. Yet even with the threat looming over us, Holmes remained calm, his mind sharp as ever. Lestrade arrived an hour later, his face clouded with concern. He had been reluctant to get involved at first, but Holmes's insistence had finally convinced him. As he entered our flat, he nodded briefly to me, but his attention was fully on Holmes, who was standing by the window staring out at the foggy street below. "Well, Kit Holmes?" Lestrade asked, his voice tight. "What's the next step? You've got me running around in circles, and I need to know what's at stake." Holmes turned, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I've got the evidence, Lestrade," he said, his voice low. "Evidence that could expose the Silent Circle, but we can't approach this matter lightly. We need to be careful." Lestrade's brow furrowed, his impatience growing. "I've heard the name before. Silent Circle, that is. But I've always thought it was nothing more than a rumor. I can't believe it's real." "You're telling me there's an organization like this? Right here, in London?" Holmes nodded, his expression hardening. "Yes, Lestrade. They've infiltrated every level of society, controlling businesses, politics, and even the underworld. And they have been manipulating events from behind the scenes for years, pulling strings to suit their needs. Greenway's death was just one of many in their efforts to protect their secrets. We have to bring them down before they can do any more damage." Lestrade looked between Holmes and me, clearly grappling with the weight of what was being said. "And you believe this evidence is enough to prove everything?" Holmes's eyes glittered with certainty. "It's not just evidence. It's the proof that they've been operating within the highest echelons of society, but getting it to the right hands is crucial. If we take it to the wrong people, it will be destroyed, or worse, used against us." I watched as Holmes moved across the room and retrieved the leather folder from its hiding place. He placed it gently on the table in front of Lestrade, and who hesitated before opening it. The documents inside were carefully arranged, their contents far more complex than anything I had seen in my time with Holmes. Greenway had indeed uncovered a trail of corruption, and the names listed on the pages were like a map of London's most powerful figures, many of whom had likely been complicit in the Silent Circle's schemes. Lestrade flipped through the pages slowly, his face gradually draining of colour as he absorbed the implications of what he was seeing. "My God," he muttered under his breath, This is huge. If this is true—" "It is," Holmes interjected, his voice firm. "But we cannot afford to waste time. The longer we wait, the more chance there is of this information vanishing into the ether. The Silent Circle will not rest until their secrets are safe." Lestrade placed the folder back on the table, his hands trembling slightly. "And what do you suggest we do? How do we bring this to the authorities without tipping them off?" Holmes paced across the room, his mind working at lightning speed. "We need to create a distraction, a false lead, something to draw their attention away from us. We'll take this information to someone we can trust, someone who won't fold under pressure. But first, we need to make sure that every last detail is accounted for so that if something goes wrong, we have backup." I felt a chill settle over me as Holmes continued to strategize. His plans were always brilliant, but they were also dangerous. This wasn't a simple investigation anymore. It had become a war against an invisible enemy that could be anywhere, watching us at any moment. We were stepping into the unknown. "Who do you have in mind?" Lestrade asked, though his voice now carried an edge of apprehension. "I have a contact in the Home Office," Holmes replied. "A man named John Markham. He's a former police officer who now works within the government. He's been helpful in the past and I trust him. He can ensure that this information is passed to the right authorities without raising alarms." "Markham?" Lestrade raised an eyebrow, clearly unfamiliar with the name. "You're sure he can be trusted? After all, we don't know who we're dealing with in the higher ranks." Holmes turned toward Lestrade, his face unreadable. "Markham is not the enemy, but trust, as you've rightly pointed out, and that is something we can never take for granted. That's why we're going to set our plan in motion tonight." I could sense the finality in Holmes's words, the quiet certainty that the moment of action was upon us. There was no turning back now. The silent circle's web had extended far and wide, and the only way to unravel it was to strike swiftly and decisively. Lestrade looked between Holmes and me, the weight of the task sinking in. "What do you need from me, Holmes?" "Follow my lead, Lestrade," Holmes said simply, "and do exactly as I say. We're about to walk into the lion's den, and I need you prepared for what's to come." With that, Holmes turned his attention back to the evidence, running his fingers over the papers one last time before tucking them safely away once more. There was no room for hesitation now. Oh, we had the silent circle in our sights, and it was only a matter of time before we exposed them for the criminals they truly were. As we prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The game was no longer just about solving a murder. It was a battle of wits against an organization whose power could not be underestimated. And we were standing at the very edge of their world, ready to strike. "Let's move, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low. "It's time to put the final pieces into place." The night had settled over London, the fog hanging thick in the air, as if to conceal the shadowy figures that moved through it. Holmes, Lestrade, and I made our way through the narrow streets toward the rendezvous point. Every step seemed more deliberate than the last, as if each of us knew the gravity of the situation. This was no longer a simple investigation. We were on the verge of something far more dangerous, a confrontation that could unravel the very fabric of London's most powerful circles. Holmes was unusually quiet as we walked. I had come to expect his constant stream of deductions, but tonight he seemed lost in thought, his mind perhaps racing through the possibilities of how everything could go wrong. The weight of the evidence we had gathered was still fresh in my mind. The Silent Circle was not an enemy we could afford to underestimate. With their influence stretching into every corner of society, a single misstep could mean the end of our investigation, or worse. As we neared the rendezvous point, Holmes stopped abruptly. He held up a hand, signaling us to halt. Lestrade and I both instinctively drew closer, our gazes scanning the street for any sign of danger. "What is it, Holmes?" Lestrade whispered, his voice edged with tension. Holmes didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the faint sounds of the street. The distant rumble of a carriage, the clink of metal against stone, the soft murmur of voices. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something about the silence felt too heavy, too expectant. He motioned for us to stay close and then moved swiftly into an alleyway, disappearing into the shadows. We followed him without question, our steps echoing softly against the cobblestones as we turned into a narrow, dimly lit passage. It was here that Holmes had arranged to meet John Markham, the former police officer he trusted. With the dim glow of a single lantern hanging near the far end of the alley cast eerie shadows, but it was the sudden hush of the air around us that had Holmes on edge. "Stay alert," Holmes said in a low voice, his eyes scanning every corner of the alley. "I don't like this." "Do you think they know we're coming?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Holmes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to observe the surroundings with a practiced eye. It was clear that his instincts were at work. and I could see the gears turning in his mind. After a moment, he nodded to himself, his face hardening with resolve. "They may know, Watson, but they won't act unless they have reason to. Our only chance is to stay one step ahead." Just as he finished speaking, a figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the alley. A tall man, with broad shoulders and a slight limp, approached us slowly. His face was obscured by the darkness, but the moment he stepped into the light, I recognized him instantly. John Markham. "Holmes, Watson, Lestrade," Markham said, his voice low and measured. "You've brought the evidence, I trust." Holmes stepped forward, holding the leather folder tightly in his hands. "We do, Markham, but there's no time to waste. We need to get this information to the right people, and we need to do it now." Markham nodded gravely. "I've already arranged for a secure route to the Home Office, but we need to be cautious. If the Silent Circle has even an inkling that we're on to them, they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." As Markham spoke, I couldn't help but notice the subtle tremor in his voice. When there was a man who had seen too much, who had walked too close to the fire. And yet his resolve was clear. He knew the danger, but he also knew that the only way to stop it was to expose the truth, no matter the cost. "Is it safe?" Lestrade asked, his voice sharp with concern. "We've already seen how far these people are willing to go." Markham glanced around, his eyes darting nervously to the alley's entrance. "It's as safe as it can be, but we must hurry. Time is running out." Holmes nodded, his face grim but resolute. "Then we move now." We set off at a brisk pace, Markham leading us through a series of winding streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares and the watchful eyes that might be lurking in plain sight. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every figure in the distance a possible agent of the Silent Circle. Holmes, in Lestrade, and I stayed close, our steps silent, our focus absolute. As we neared the entrance to the Home Office, I could see the faintest outline of a carriage waiting nearby, its driver hunched low, clearly trying to avoid attention. Markham led us toward it, his pace quickening. "This is it," Markham said, his voice tight with urgency. "We get in, and we get this to the right hands. Once it's there, we can expose everything." The door of the carriage swung open, and we climbed inside, the darkness inside offering a brief respite from the tension that had been building in our hearts. As the carriage jolted into motion, I felt a sense of unease settle over me. We were so close now. Too close. The Silent Circle would never let us expose them without a fight. Holmes sat in the corner, his mind already calculating the next steps. Lestrade sat opposite me, his eyes darting nervously as the carriage rocked gently over the cobblestones. I, too, was consumed by the weight of what was to come, but I knew that we were not turning back. We were committed now, and there was no escaping the storm that was gathering on the horizon. The carriage moved through the streets with purpose, the night air thickening as we approached the final leg of our journey. It was then, just as I was about to speak, that the unmistakable sound of a carriage wheel grinding against the cobblestones echoed from behind us. Someone was following us. Holmes's eyes flicked to me, a brief but unmistakable flash of realization in his gaze. The Silent Circle had caught wind of our plan. They were coming for us. Without warning, Holmes reached for the door, pulling it open as the carriage screeched to a halt. "We move now," he barked. Before any of us could react, Holmes leapt into action. Holmes's sudden movement caught us all off guard. He slammed the carriage door open with force, almost as if anticipating the pursuit before it had even begun. His sharp eyes scanned the narrow street ahead, calculating the best way forward. Without hesitation, he jumped out into the night, landing silently on the cobblestones. I was just behind him, but as I moved to follow, a shout rang out from the street behind us, an unmistakable voice calling for reinforcements. "They've found us," Lestrade muttered under his breath, as the unmistakable sound of hooves grew louder behind us. Holmes, ever composed, didn't falter. He turned swiftly to Markham, who was still inside the carriage, clearly hesitant. "Stay low, Markham. If they're after us, they'll certainly come for you next." Markham nodded, his face pale but determined. Holmes turned back to us, his expression calculating, as if weighing every option in that brief moment. The danger was clear, but Holmes had already formulated a plan. "We head for the alley just ahead, Watson," he said, pointing to the right where a narrow passageway disappeared into shadow. "Lestrade, take the other side of the street. If they think we've split up, it may confuse them." I didn't need further instruction. Holmes's plan was simple but effective, and I trusted him implicitly. The air seemed to thicken as I dashed across the street, the night becoming even more oppressive, each shadow more menacing than the last. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. The silent circle had mobilized, and they were closing in. I glanced over my shoulder to see Holmes moving with a fluidity that made him appear as though he was part of the very fog that surrounded us. Lestrade, a few paces behind me, took his position at the other end of the street, watching for any sign of pursuit. The alley before me was dark and narrow, its walls closing in as I pressed forward, my heart pounding in my chest. We were running blind, with only Holmes's instincts to guide us. The alley twisted ahead, and I could barely make out the faint outline of a door at the far end, a possible escape. But my mind raced with questions. How had the silent circle tracked us so quickly? Had they known all along that we were on to them, waiting for the right moment to strike? And if they were truly as powerful as Holmes suspected, how could we possibly evade them? We reached the end of the alley, and Holmes's sharp gaze flicked toward the door. It was an old building, its windows dark and lifeless, but something about it seemed right. Holmes reached for the handle, pausing just for a moment, his ear trained to the sounds outside. "There's someone inside," he said softly, as if confirming his suspicions. "Stay low and don't make a sound." I nodded, barely able to catch my breath, and followed him inside. The building was abandoned, its interior dusty and dim, with only a faint hint of moonlight filtering through cracks in the boarded-up windows. Holmes moved ahead with practiced ease, leading us deeper into the structure. It was only when we reached the back room that he stopped, turning to face us. "We wait here," he whispered, his voice just above a breath. We can't risk leading them directly to Markham." Lestrade caught up just as Holmes gestured for us to remain quiet. A few seconds later, the sound of hooves and wheels echoed from the street outside, stopping just beyond the alleyway's entrance. There was a brief silence before the unmistakable sound of footsteps began to creep closer. They were searching. Holmes's expression was unreadable as he crouched low, his eyes trained on the shadows at the far end of the room. The minutes stretched, the tension building in the stale air. The footsteps outside stopped abruptly, and for a fleeting moment all was silent. Then the door to the building creaked open. I felt my breath catch in my throat as a shadow fell across the threshold. I couldn't make out the figure, but I could sense their presence, confident, methodical, as though they were certain they had us cornered. I glanced at Holmes, whose face was a mask of focused concentration, his mind already processing the next move. The door creaked again, this time accompanied by a quiet voice from the other side. "They've gone inside. Check the building. There's nowhere left for them to run." I saw Holmes's fingers tighten around the edge of the table in front of him, his mind working rapidly. He was calculating our next move, knowing that we had only moments before we were discovered. A low whistle from the street signaled a shift in direction. It was a signal, a command. The figure outside was signaling to someone. The door clicked shut again, and the footsteps slowly receded. Holmes let out a slow, deliberate breath. "They're waiting for us to make a move," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "But they won't give up so easily. We need to move quickly." I nodded in understanding, though the uncertainty of the situation gnawed at me. If we were discovered now, there would be no escape. But Holmes had a plan, and I had learned long ago to trust his instincts. "We'll use the back exit," Holmes whispered, pointing to a narrow door at the back of the room. "I have a feeling they'll be watching the front." Lestrade moved first, his steps swift but silent. I followed close behind, with Holmes just behind me. The door creaked open as we slipped through it, emerging into the dense fog of the alleyway once more. The air felt even colder now, the silence unnerving, but we didn't stop to consider our options. We had to keep moving. As we crept through the alley, the sounds of pursuit faded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The silent circle wasn't just a group of powerful men. They were a network, and they knew how to track and eliminate threats. But they hadn't anticipated us. And as Holmes glanced over at me, I saw the familiar glint in his eye, the one that said, "We're not done yet." "This is only the beginning," he whispered. And with that, we moved deeper into the fog, knowing that the real fight had only just begun. The fog grew denser as we moved deeper into the labyrinth of alleys, the faint echoes of pursuit slowly fading behind us. Holmes, Lestrade, and I pressed on, our footsteps muffled against the cobblestones. The weight of the night's events settled heavily on my chest. Each passing moment seemed to stretch longer than the last, as if the darkness itself was closing in around us, tightening with every step we took. Holmes, however, remained calm and composed, his mind clearly focused on the next move. I glanced at him, noting the intensity in his eyes. He was already formulating the next phase of the plan, already thinking 3-4 steps ahead. "We can't outrun them forever," I muttered under my breath. My voice felt out of place in the heavy silence surrounding us, but it was a thought that had been weighing on my mind. "We need to get this evidence to the right hands, Holmes. We can't keep running." Holmes glanced back at me, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You're right, Watson. Running won't solve anything. We need to finish this, once and for all. But first, we need to find a way to guarantee that the silent circle can't reach us before we've exposed them. We can't afford to fail." His words rang with a quiet certainty. It was clear that Holmes wasn't just thinking about the immediate danger, but the larger picture, the end game. We couldn't simply slip into the shadows and hope the conspiracy would unravel on its own. No, we had to force the truth into the light, regardless of how many obstacles the silent circle threw our way. We turned a corner and found ourselves on a narrow street, lined with boarded-up shops and darkened windows. The buildings here were older, their stone facades cracked and weathered, as though they had withstood the test of time and were still standing, despite it all. Holmes paused, his sharp eyes scanning the area. "There's a safe house nearby," he said quietly. "A place where we can regroup and plan our next move. We'll be out of sight for a while, but not for long." Lestrade, who had been following closely behind, looked skeptical. "Are you sure we can trust it? We don't know who might be watching us now." Holmes gave him a quick, reassuring look. "We'll stay low, but the silent circle is already on to us. They know we're close to the truth, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets. We need to be smarter than they are." As we made our way down the dimly lit street, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. Every corner seemed to hide a new threat, every shadow a potential ambush. And yet, Holmes moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. It was unsettling, to be certain, but it was also strangely reassuring. We reached the safe house, a small, unassuming building tucked between two larger structures. Holmes knocked twice on the door, a sharp, deliberate series of taps. After a brief moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with a guarded expression. She glanced at each of us, her eyes pausing on Holmes, before stepping aside to let us in. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of relief. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." Holmes gave her a curt nod. "We're not out of danger yet, but we need to lay low for a while and plan our next move." Once inside, the woman, whom I later learned was named Evelyn, led us to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the house. It was sparsely furnished, with only a few chairs and a table covered in maps and papers. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Sit down, all of you," Holmes instructed. "We've made it this far, but now we have to make sure we don't make any mistakes. Or we need to take control of this situation before the Silent Circle can tighten their grip on us." We sat, the weight of the case pressing down on us as Holmes began to lay out the next steps. He spoke with a quiet urgency, his mind already several moves ahead. The first thing we needed to do, he explained, was ensure that Markham's safety was secured. He couldn't be the one to carry the evidence further, not now that we knew the extent of the danger. The Silent Circle would be looking for him, and if they found him, they would stop at nothing to silence him. "Lestrade, I need you to go to the constabulary and ensure that Markham's name doesn't come up in any official reports," Holmes continued. "If they think he's a suspect, they'll have all the more reason to target him. We need to make him disappear for a time." Lestrade nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Understood. I'll make sure he's protected. But what about you, Holmes? What's our next move?" Holmes's gaze flicked over the map, spread out before him, his mind clearly racing. "We need to put the pieces together, Lestrade. The Silent Circle's web of influence is vast, but every conspiracy has a core. We need to find it, and we need to do it quickly." I watched as Holmes's mind worked, his eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next, as if the solution to our problem was hidden in the very air around us. I knew from experience that when Holmes's mind was so focused, nothing could deter him, not even the most dangerous of enemies. But even as Holmes spoke, I could feel the tension building again. The Silent Circle would be closing in, and we couldn't afford to underestimate their reach. And we were no longer just investigators trying to solve a mystery. We were now pawns in a game much larger than we had ever anticipated. If we failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Holmes stopped speaking abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he stood up, a sudden realization crossing his face. "There's something we missed," he muttered to himself. "Something that connects all of this." I looked up at him, my pulse quickening, as I saw the spark of understanding in his eyes. "What is it, Holmes?" "We need to find the one person at the heart of it all," he said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "The one person who can bring the Silent Circle to its knees." I felt the room grow colder, the weight of Holmes's words settling over us like a storm on the horizon. But we were no longer merely running from the Silent Circle, we were about to confront them head-on. And in that moment, I knew that the stakes had never been higher. Holmes's words hung in the air, thick with implication. There was someone at the core of this, someone who had orchestrated it all, whose identity had eluded us up until this point. The realization hit me with an unsettling clarity. We were on the verge of something far more dangerous than we had anticipated. The Silent Circle was not just a network of powerful men and women, it was a system built around a single central figure. If we found that person, we would have the means to dismantle the entire organization. "Who do you think it is, Holmes?" I asked, my voice betraying the urgency that was building inside me. Holmes stood silently for a moment, his eyes scanning the map once more, though I knew he was already far beyond the documents in front of him. His mind was working with the precision of a master tactician, piecing together fragments of the puzzle that had eluded us. "I don't know yet, Watson," he said finally, his voice steady but tinged with a rare sense of frustration. "But I have a theory. There's one person who has remained remarkably absent from all of this, the person who controls everything without ever showing their face." I felt a chill run through me. Holmes was rarely so cryptic. His theories were always grounded in logic, but this time it seemed there was more at play. "We've been looking at the wrong angles," Holmes continued, his gaze flicking to Lestrade. "We've been chasing the Silent Circle's pawns, thinking they were the key. But the key to everything lies with the person who has been manipulating them from the shadows, the one who has stayed out of the public eye." Lestrade looked perplexed. "You're telling me that someone has been pulling the strings from behind the scenes? That's who we need to find?" "Yes," Holmes replied, nodding slowly. "Whoever that person is, they've ensured that their involvement has never been traced. They've covered their tracks meticulously, but no one is perfect, Lestrade. Not even the most careful conspirator leaves no trace." I could see the wheels turning in Holmes's mind. His face was set in a mask of determination as he leaned over the map, his fingers tracing a route through the city. A route that had once seemed insignificant, but now held the potential to lead us to the very heart of the conspiracy. "Waddy, I've been going over the information we have," Holmes said quietly, more to himself than to us. "The names, the connections, the patterns. One person stands out above all others, an individual who has the means, the motive, and the access to orchestrate something of this magnitude." He turned to me, his eyes sharp. "It's time we pay a visit to someone who has been in the shadows, someone we've overlooked." I could feel my heart skip a beat. Holmes's words were like a spark in the dark, illuminating a path that had once been hidden. We were finally closing in on the mastermind behind the Silent Circle. "Who are you referring to?" Lestrade asked, his tone suddenly tense. "Who's the person we've been missing?" Holmes's lips curled into a small but knowing smile. "Sir Reginald Barrington." The name struck me like a blow to the chest. Sir Reginald Barrington was a name I knew well. An influential figure in both political and financial circles, he was a man whose presence could not be ignored, a man whose power seemed to stretch across every level of society. And yet he had remained conspicuously absent from the investigation up until now. "But Barrington," I began, struggling to reconcile the name with what we knew. "He's one of the most respected men in the country. His name is synonymous with philanthropy. He's even been mentioned in Parliament. Why would he be involved in something as sinister as this?" Holmes's gaze was unwavering. "Precisely. That's what makes him so dangerous. People like Barrington don't need to get their hands dirty. They pull the strings from a distance, manipulating the system to their advantage. He's been operating under the radar, using his influence to protect the Silent Circle's interests without ever having to appear in the spotlight." Lestrade looked unconvinced. "But we've had no evidence linking Barrington to any of this. How can we be sure he's the one we're looking for?" Holmes gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I don't have solid proof, Lestrade. Not yet. But the connections are there. Barrington has ties to the men we've already identified as key players in the Silent Circle. He's been using them as pawns, leveraging their influence to further his own interests. I watched as Holmes's eyes narrowed, his thoughts racing ahead. If we confront Barrington directly, we may never get another chance. He's far too powerful and he has far too much to lose. But if we can gather more evidence, if we can expose his involvement in the circle, Lestrade's voice cut through the air. We'll take him down. Holmes nodded. Exactly. The plan was beginning to take shape, but the risks were clear. If Barrington was indeed the mastermind behind the silent circle, then confronting him would be no small feat. He would have already anticipated our move, and he would be prepared for us. We need to find proof, and we need to find it quickly, Holmes said, his voice steady. Lestrade, you'll need to gather intelligence on Barrington's activities. We must uncover any connections he has to the silent circle that haven't already been uncovered. Lestrade nodded, his face now set with determination. And what about you, Holmes? What's our next step? Holmes paused, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. I'll visit Barrington's estate. I have a feeling we'll find something there, something that will give us the leverage we need. The thought of Holmes going to Barrington's estate alone gave me pause. Barrington's influence was vast, and we had no idea how deeply he had embedded himself within the silent circle's web. You're not going alone, I said firmly. We'll go with you. Holmes's eyes flicked to me, his expression unreadable. Very well, Watson, we'll go together, but we must remain careful. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. And with that, we set our course for Barrington's estate, knowing that we were finally on the verge of uncovering the man behind the curtain, the one who had pulled all the strings, orchestrated all the chaos, and now stood as the last obstacle between us and the truth. The air was thick with anticipation as we approached Sir Reginald Barrington's estate. The sprawling grounds were shrouded in mist, the faintest traces of moonlight casting long shadows over the manicured hedges and towering gates. Holmes moved with his usual silent grace, his every step deliberate, though there was an undeniable tension in his posture. We had come so far, and yet the final confrontation felt like stepping into the lion's den. Barrington was a man of immense power, his name synonymous with respect and authority. If Holmes was correct, we were about to uncover the face of the very man who had orchestrated the sinister web of the silent circle. I don't like this, Lestrade muttered under his breath as we approached the front door. His hand instinctively reached for his pocket, or checking for the reassuring presence of his pistol. It feels too easy. Holmes glanced over at him, his expression unreadable. We are entering a carefully constructed trap, Lestrade. Barrington will have prepared for this moment. But we have one advantage. He doesn't know what we've discovered. He doesn't know that we're on to him. I could feel the weight of Holmes's words pressing down on me, the enormity of the task ahead settling in my chest. This wasn't just about solving a murder anymore. It was about unmasking a conspiracy that had touched the very heart of London's elite, a web of deceit and manipulation that had lasted for years. And at its centre stood Barrington, a man who had wielded his power with frightening precision. The door to the estate creaked open as we arrived at the front steps, and we were greeted by a tall butler, to his face stoic, his eyes betraying no hint of surprise. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice neutral. "Sir Reginald is expecting you." Holmes nodded curtly, his eyes scanning the man for any signs of tension. The butler, however, remained composed, leading us through the grand hall of the estate. The opulence of the surroundings did little to soften the sense of dread that seemed to grow heavier with every step. We were ushered into a study, where Sir Reginald Barrington sat behind a large oak desk, his posture perfect, his hands clasped in front of him. He was exactly as I had imagined him, tall, distinguished, with an air of unshakable confidence. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of something darker, something far more calculating than the genial facade he wore. "Holmes," Barrington greeted him, his voice smooth, but laced with the charm of a man who knew how to manipulate every word. "I was wondering when you would come knocking. Please do sit." Holmes, ever composed, took the chair opposite Barrington without hesitation. "We've been looking for you, Sir Reginald, and it seems our search has finally come to an end." Barrington's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You've been very persistent, I must admit, but I'm afraid you've misunderstood your position, Holmes. You see, you're at the end of the road, and you're not the first to come here with questions." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I'm sure you've been careful, but no one is infallible, not even you." Barrington's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You found the pieces, haven't you? But you're still a few steps behind. You think you've uncovered everything, but you haven't even begun to understand the full scope of what you've stumbled upon." I could feel the tension building in the room, and yet Holmes remained unflinching, his eyes locked on Barrington with unwavering focus. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Barrington," Holmes said softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "The silent circle is nothing more than a front for your operations. You've manipulated men in power, played them against one another, and orchestrated crimes without ever getting your hands dirty." Barrington leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "You're clever, Holmes, I'll give you that. But cleverness won't save you now. You've made a dangerous enemy, and the truth you've uncovered won't matter to anyone but you." Holmes's eyes never wavered, his mind already calculating the next move. "That's where you're wrong. It's not just about me, Barrington. It's about everyone you've hurt. It's about the people you've used and discarded to further your own interests." Barrington's gaze flicked to Lestrade, then to me, before returning to Holmes. "You think you can expose me? Do you honestly believe that anyone will listen to you? I've made sure of that. Your evidence means nothing." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "You're wrong, Barrington. The evidence is irrefutable. We've already sent it to the right people. You can't stop what's coming." Barrington's demeanour shifted ever so slightly, the facade cracking for just a moment. "You think you've won, Holmes. You think you've beaten me." Holmes's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Not yet. Oh, but we're closer than you think." There was a tense silence as Barrington's eyes flickered with uncertainty, the weight of the situation finally settling in. His smug confidence had faltered, and I could see the moment of realization dawn on him. He had underestimated us. He had underestimated Holmes. The door to the study suddenly flew open, and a group of uniformed constables flooded the room, their presence a clear sign that Barrington's empire was crumbling. Lestrade, who had been quietly watching from the side, stepped forward, a satisfied grin on his face. "Sir Reginald Barrington," Lestrade said, his voice authoritative, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and a number of other charges related to the Silent Circle. You're going to pay for what you've done." Barrington's face twisted in rage. But there was no escape now. The law had finally caught up with him. Holmes stood, his gaze lingering on Barrington for just a moment longer. "You were a formidable opponent, Barrington, but every empire eventually falls." As Barrington was led away in cuffs, I could feel a sense of closure wash over me. The case was finally over, the mystery unravelled, and the conspiracy exposed. The Silent Circle had been dismantled, its power shattered, and the truth had come to light. Holmes turned to me, his expression softening ever so slightly. "It's over, Watson, but we both know that in this line of work there's always another case waiting for us." I nodded, a sense of admiration and relief flooding through me. "Indeed, Holmes. And I'll be right here, as always, ready for whatever comes next." With that, we left Barrington's estate, I knowing that justice had been served and the City of London was a little bit safer because of it,